Welcome. Let's take some time to go over a true tale together. The tale of the origin of life on Earth and the theory of endosymbiosis. Once upon a time, there was a burning mass of molten rock. We call this rock Hadean Earth, and it is how our planet looked 4.6 billion years ago. This Hadean Earth had a unique atmosphere, one of carbon dioxide, nitrogen gas, water vapor, hydrogen gas, and compounds with hydrogen atoms bonded to light elements, such as hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, and methane. Over time, Hadean Earth slowly began to cool. It is now about 4 billion years ago. There are now rocks on Hadean Earth, and as Hadean Earth cools, the water vapor in the atmosphere condenses into liquid water, leading to the creation of Earth's first oceans. Because Hadean Earth's atmosphere has such high availability of hydrogen atoms, very little energy is required for chemical reactions to occur between different molecules, leading to the formation of carbon-rich organic compounds. Over time, organic compounds derived from Hadean Earth's atmosphere converted into more complex molecules, such the amino acids alanine, glycine, valine, and proline, as well as nitrogenous bases like adenine. These are the building blocks of proteins and DNA respectively. Eventually, through a series of many reactions, over a very long period of time, organic molecules came together to form macromolecules that would become the building blocks of life. Carbohydrates, nucleic acids, proteins, and lipids. With time, these chemical building blocks would interact in different ways, at random, until eventually, around 3.5 billion years ago, they would assemble into a single, functional, interdependent unit. Life. This is now Archean Earth. Life began as a single, simple cell. It lacked organelles and external structures, but it was able to thrive in Archean Earth's harsh environment. We call these first living cells LUCA, or last universal common ancestor, from which all life is believed to have evolved. Changes and mutations occur in the genetic material within cells at random, and those that are helpful or useful to the cell allow that cell to survive and pass on its genetic material to the next generation. This is early evolution, and it is the basis of how populations change over time. From LUCA, life evolved prokaryotic cells, such as bacteria, simple cells with a protective cell wall and plasma membrane, as well as cytoplasm, ribosomes, DNA. These prokaryotic cells ruled the Earth as the only living organisms for nearly 1 billion years. It is now Proterozoic Earth, about 2.5 billion years ago, and a special type of bacteria just emerged. Cyanobacteria. These bacteria were special because they could take in sunlight as energy and use it to produce nutrients for the cell through a process called photosynthesis. A byproduct of this process was the release of oxygen into the atmosphere. The Earth had many molecules in its atmosphere, but it had never seen oxygen gas before. The emergence of photosynthetic organisms, like cyanobacteria, slowly caused Earth to become an oxygen-rich environment. Suddenly, many of our living single-cell friends began to struggle to survive. Since life on Earth evolved to live in an oxygen-free environment, the sudden abundance of oxygen in the air proved toxic to most life forms. Also, oxygen is incredibly reactive and technically toxic in nature. Life forms needed to hide from the oxygen, or they perished. Some forms of life were lucky though. With time, some life evolved to survive in an oxygen-rich environment, and even found ways to use this toxic oxygen to make energy. These bacterial cells are called aerobes. Because aerobes were able to survive and thrive better than other life forms, traits to survive in and use oxygen were passed on, and aerobes grew more numerous on Earth. So now, in Proterozoic Earth, there are single-celled bacterial life forms, capable of using solar energy to produce nutrients and oxygen, as well as single-celled life forms, capable of using said oxygen to produce energy. It is now just over 2.1 billion years ago, and something incredible happens. A larger cell that is incapable of living in the oxygen-rich environment, an anaerobe, consumes a smaller aerobic bacterium, but the larger anaerobe never digests the smaller aerobe. Instead, the aerobe lives and thrives within the larger anaerobe and continues using the oxygen in the atmosphere to make energy. Because the aerobe now resides safely within the larger anaerobe, it is never killed nor digested by any other cell. So it keeps producing more and more energy from oxygen. More energy than the aerobe would ever need for just itself. So, the larger anaerobe begins to use the aerobe's excess energy for itself. The smaller aerobe has a large safe home, and the larger anaerobe has a means to survive the oxygen-rich environment, and even get energy from the oxygen through the aerobe. Everyone is happy. Eventually, the aerobe and the anaerobe grew fully dependent on one another and gave rise to a new form of life. Eukaryotes. The aerobe within the eukaryotic cells were then dubbed mitochondria. Even though oxygen is toxic, it fostered the earliest form of cooperation and collaboration between living organisms on Earth. Some of these eukaryotic cells then did something else that is incredible. Some of them went on to then consume smaller cyanobacteria, without digesting them. In a similar fashion to the previous symbiotic relationship, the larger eukaryotic cell benefited from the cyanobacteria's ability to photosynthesize. And the cyanobacteria benefited from the larger cell's protection. Eventually, the larger eukaryotic cell and the cyanobacteria grew fully dependent on one another, and gave rise to photosynthetic eukaryotes. The cyanobacteria within the eukaryotic cells were then dubbed chloroplasts. Cooperation and collaboration between cells continued, until eventually, around 1 billion years ago, many eukaryotic cells associated with one another to a point that they all became interdependent on one another, forming the world's first multicellular organisms. From here, evolution really took flight, leading to the emergence of the many, many life forms we see around us today. This is our current theory in the origins of life on Earth.
No one knows for sure how life started on Earth, but based on the evidence and the information that we have available to us, this is our best theory to date. We call this theory of how eukaryotes arose endosymbiosis, because this theory postulates that a living thing, specifically a prokaryote, is living together within another living thing, within another prokaryote, giving rise to eukaryotes. So breaking down the term endosymbiosis, endo means within, sym means together, and bio means living. So, living things living together, one within the other. Endosymbiosis. Makes sense.